Hello, how are you all doing? My name's Terry Lee Shield. I am host of Love School. If you don't know, if you're seeing this on YouTube, um, I just want to have a bit of a bit more informal, casual chat with you today. Um, about some of my personal experiences with inner child work and reparenting, why it was needed, about the changes in culture and when you go from place to place with regard to this is all with regard to parenting and childhood wounds. And then also the drastic change that we have gone through in the past 100 years. So maybe it's 5 generations or so with regards to raising children, standards, expectations in society, how much we've evolved to understand each other better with regard to psychology and just how that all kind of ties in with this idea of having inner child wounds and needing to reparent. I have not planned it. It was a little bit spontaneous, but I just kind of felt like I wanted to do this video as a bit of a chat. So forgive me if I stumble with my words and if I go off on tangents. That's why, because it's just unplanned. The reparenting and child healing process for me has been quite long. I didn't even realize what I was doing at first. I was just really wanted to heal. And this is the path that I ended up finding the most healing, the most progress in my recovery. All of the stuff that I've done, that I share through Love School has been beneficial in one way or another. That's why I'm sharing it. And I think this is why also I talk about being holistic, because we kind of need to do all this stuff, I think, to really get to a point of recovery. But the core wound for me was this need for inner child healing and reparenting. My background is I am from Northern England, a working class background from a divorced family. My parents divorced when I was 6. My dad was in the Navy before that anyway, so he wasn't ever a steady influence in my life. So like my father role, if you like, was a absent, hedonistic dad who liked to drink, liked to do drugs, was very hot-headed, just walked away if there was a problem, didn't, stick around and work through things. He got too angry and would have outbursts and things and left. I've been in touch with my dad my entire life. I was actually in touch with my dad my entire life, although there was periods where, especially when the divorce first happened when I was young, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that sort of age. I think it was like 12 when we eventually started to see him regular-ish every other weekend. But other than that, he would sometimes come, sometimes wouldn't. And then we would see him for like a day, 2 days, whatever it was. It was very sporadic. And I was still in touch with my nan, like my dad's side of the family. I, as a child, considered the dysfunctional side of the family. We had lovely holidays together with my nan. My granddad was an alcoholic. He was very aggressive. He was never violent towards us, but I knew he was violent towards my dad when he was growing up. But he was very, disconnected. He wasn't like the jolly granddad sort of thing. He would be very sharp with us and did his own thing in his shed most of the time. And then my grandparents divorced, my granddad died, and there was a huge family bust up. And a lot of that family didn't really speak to. Was quite close with one of my dad's sisters. In fact, I was close with a couple of them, but because of the bust up, one of them I didn't really speak to very, very much. And the one that I was close with died. quick summary of my dad's side of the family. So my mom pretty much raised my sister and I, sister's a couple of years younger, as a single parent. She worked a lot to try and pay the bills, struggled, got in debt. We were very poor, working class family, as I said. My dad didn't really help out financially. Well, he didn't help out at all financially. So we struggled financially, and that was a big deal in my family. We grew up very much knowing that there wasn't much money and there wasn't much time, there wasn't much of anything. But we struggled by. My mom actually has a much bigger family. She has like 7 brothers and sisters. A few of them have died now. And have a lot of cousins. I have cousins on both sides of the family, but a lot of cousins on my mom's side of the family. My mom's side of the family was like my main kind of family that I see most regular and stuff. They are considered, in the culture I grew up with, a pretty normal, decent family. And they are. Individually, they're decent people who've all got their own imperfections, issues, wounds, whatever you want to call it. But the culture I was raised in by, well, I'll talk a little bit about my mom, so about my mother wound, what that was. My mom was hardworking, dedicated, never took help, was very, very demanding, was very regimented, bit of a control freak, liked what what we're doing all the time, and also very distant, as in not particularly affectionate, not particularly nurturing. We had our basic needs met, and that was that. Not with any malice, just that she was a single parent, working, had 2 kids, and that was her life, and that was a bit of an issue. It was an issue for her because I don't think she felt like she had support, even though she had all these brothers and sisters. That's a whole other issue that I've never really got that bottom of, but we sometimes got babysat, but by my cousins. And then occasionally in the summer holidays, I remember going to see and stay with my auntie sometimes. But other than that, my mom pretty much had to struggle and raise us by herself. And I grew up in the northeast of England. So again, working class, ex industrial town that had gone through a closure and pretty much was very poor and have a really big alcoholic rate and drinking culture. So my mom was a binge drinker, as in what she called her get sane night was to get away from my sister and I on a Friday night, get pissed off her head, and then we had to deal with the consequences when she come home, which obviously she couldn't then remember. That's another whole part of my healing that I've had to go through and the reparenting. So drink was a big, big culture norm when I grew up. This dysfunctional relationship with alcohol, over drinking, binge drinking, and pretty much the only time we got together as a family was to drink. Christmas and parties and things. There wasn't ever really any time for us as kids to bond as a family. And kids and parents were separate. The kids were in one group, parents were in another group. So it was like when we got together, the parents often were together, the adults were together, and the children were together. And there was a couple of my aunties who would integrate with us, but otherwise it was a very different hierarchy. And because I had a very big age of cousins, and I was actually in the middle, towards the bottom of the middle of the age, I had a lot of older cousins who had quite a lot of influence over me. So that was the kind of culture and dynamic. So the point I'm trying to get at explaining that is, and why sometimes we might struggle to get help that we need, or even think that we need help, is because that, as far as I was concerned, was completely normal. And in regard to the entire community that I grew up with that is considered normal to Be quite hard. That's what I want to say, is to be hard. To raise your children to be tough. That your work, your kids don't really get attention because you're busy working. You're gonna drink after work, and that's it. The kids get dragged around the adult parties because they're all together drinking, and the kids just kind of raise themselves. I think if you're into all that like generational chat, I am right on the cusp, right? So I am classed as an Xennial. I'm at the end of Gen X and the beginning of a millennial. So I am that generation where we had to pretty much raise ourselves, but as I got towards like my late teens and stuff, we had tech. We started, the internet, was about and stuff, and we started to have computer games and that sort of thing as I was growing up. So I'm in this kind of pre-digital age of being raised. And I think for a lot of us of that generation as well, if you look into these generational themes and stuff, I find them quite interesting. I try not to use that language personally because I don't know how helpful it is because it separates us. But also these trends are really apparent, and they're kind of studied in that now to explain why we are, how we are. So I'm in this Xennial bracket, and the way I was raised was considered normal. Now, there's some things now that the way I was raised would not be considered appropriate. The way I was raised, some of the ways that I was raised would be considered abuse and neglect. However, at the time, they weren't. In the culture I was raised in, they weren't. The culture I was raised in, very much, and the time, people hit their kids. It was normal to smack your kids. Some of the things that happened, I'll just give you some examples. And this is just so you can maybe relate it to your own story or understand that some of the things that we think is normal or was normal, unacceptable, that actually, as I've gone through this reparenting healing process, has come up that I had to be dealt with, that actually that wasn't okay with me as a child. As a child, that was not okay. Me as an adult, doing that with my own children or with other children would not be okay. And this is why reparenting is really important, because what might have been okay for our parents is not okay for us. What might have been okay then is not okay now. And you have to go through this process to figure that out. So a couple of examples of things that happened that I've had to work through. My mom had a habit of locking us up, which I don't think will be allowed now at all. We had locks on our bedroom doors. We went in that bedroom at 7 p.m. and we got unlocked at 7 p.m. If I needed the toilet, it was tough titty. I would wee the bed or wet myself or whatever, and then get told off for wetting myself. That would not be acceptable, I don't think now. That would be considered neglect, even abuse. My mom meant no ill will with that. And at that time, I don't think that would have been, I'm sure lots of parents did that, lock their kids because you had a bedtime and you stuck to it. My mom was of the generation that we were left to, like, she was very proud of the fact that we were left to cry. We did not get attention when we cried, as babies, I'm talking about. We were hit, we were smacked from a young age. I remember getting hit at like age 2 by one of my uncles so hard I had a mark. That would not be it would not be acceptable now. And again, in the family culture, that was fine. I remember there being a conversation that he hit me too hard, but no one had an issue that he actually hit me, you know. Couple other things that I'm trying to even think, because it was being forced to eat. You ate the food that was in front of you. If you didn't eat, it was forced down your neck. Like you were eating that food or you were starved. It was one or the other. Just being really, really strict with discipline. And then the opposite side being then like kicked out the house. You weren't allowed to come home. If you went out to play, if you were kicked out for some holiday or whatever, and you were going out to play, you were out. You weren't coming back in. Like, don't think you get to come into this room. Some of the other things that I had to really kind of get to grips with in this process, So one was I was sexually abused by one of my cousins who was a bit older. He was still a child. He was still considered a minor, which has made it very difficult for reporting and stuff. But like some things that I remember, like not wanting to play with that cousin because I didn't want to be sexually abused, but being told I wasn't when I refused to play, said I don't want to play, and stay downstairs with the parents, being told you have to go upstairs and play. No inquiry as to why I didn't want to play, no trying to sort anything out. So I just had to do that. And therefore, I ended up being sexually abused more when I was trying to set my own boundaries and say I didn't want it. And again, my mum had no idea at the time. I didn't know how to tell her what was going on. And again, it was perfectly normal. The kids were playing upstairs and the parents were having an adult conversation. They did not realize that what they were doing was harmful or even neglectful or leading to me being abused. Now, what's interesting is when I started to really get to grips with some of that, and one of the reasons why I didn't was because of that culture. Because one, I thought I was overreacting to my abuse and neglect because it was totally acceptable, was normal. And I was afraid of losing my family and the culture around it. So a couple things that kind of came up when this might happen through your own reparenting process. When I started to doing a healing work and reparenting, I started having challenging conversations. I started doing that with my mom and my dad. And obviously that wasn't public, that wasn't something that was happening public, but I would have these conversations with them and we would be working through the issues. There are periods when I've had space from them and not spoke to them at all as I was trying to make sense of all this. There were times when I spoke about stuff and it was completely denied, just as in, I don't remember. Still remember. There were times when I've had to really challenge them on you honestly think this behavior that you did then that you're doing now is fine? And then would have to admit that no, it wasn't. And I still wouldn't potentially get an apology. There can be lots of ups and downs in this process. And then when I started to integrate it all, when I started to feel more comfortable talking about it, and I remember once the first time casually shared something online about this, I mentioned abuse, family abuse or something. And my auntie, who had never hardly ever speak to her, my auntie, again, we would see each other at special occasions, sort of thing, and sometimes we'll go out for meals, with them, that sort of thing. But it was a very casual relationship. We don't really we're not close. She didn't know anything really about me or my life. And yet, as soon as I posted about family abuse, she was in my inbox basically telling me I wasn't really abused. How dare I share stuff like this? My mom always did my best, like really defensive. Stuff at the time was really triggering. And stuff at the time that I revealed was actually the deep fears of why I didn't do this work, why I had repressed it all for so long, was because I was going to have to face my entire family, potentially community. I'm challenging a whole culture here just by speaking about the things that happened to me as a child that were wrong, that caused me damage, that I've had to work through. And actually, even there are times through my process where I have been really angry. I have blamed my parents for a lot of my problems. I have really had strong emotional responses. And like I say, there's times when I've stepped away and moved forward. But actually, I have been able to, with my family, with my parents, and even at times, I only had one my grandma left, even at times with my nan, have these conversations and work through this process. Now, I actually have a pretty good relationship with both of my parents. Very different relationships with them, but we've been able to work through that and go through the process. So even though there were times when I did have to not be around my family, ultimately by going through the process, I have been able to build them bonds and we have better relationships because of it, stronger boundaries. And I was able to get the healing that I needed so that I wasn't facing the problems that I was facing. And that I had my needs met of being seen and heard and validated and all that by going through the process. However, my extended family, who I used to have a lot of attachments around this idea of family, because I've had such a large extended family with aunties and uncles, cousins, and I was friendly with them. We had a laugh. Every association with my family was fun times, right? It was partying and booze and fun and games, apart from the abusive, crazy, bit weird stuff. Like, for example, drinking from a really young age. Like, those associations have been made through my family, which would be considered grooming. But again, they didn't do it intentionally to like harm me or anything. It was just they were initiating me into their culture that they were in. It's like a weird lighting thing. There. Is that better? So I guess I wanted to share a bit about that, a bit about how we can have. Oh, sorry, I was talking about my extended family. So my extended family, I pretty much don't speak to now. Didn't fall out with them. I just started talking publicly about what happened. And apart from that one auntie who got in my inbox, none of them have ever mentioned it. None of them have been in touch. None of them have validated my experiences or denied my experiences. They just ignore me. I might as well not exist. When I was going through real problems and I reached out to some of them, so I reached out to some for help, didn't get it. I reached out to some of them just for friendship, and it just didn't happen because I felt there was things that I couldn't say. We just weren't able to connect with each other. So actually, my family now is really small, as in it's like my immediate family. I've had to actually do a lot of work around my sister as well, because my sister and I were connected through our experience. Obviously, we shared a home. My sister struggled with a lot of problems, symptoms from our upbringing as well. My sister and I were entangled in some of our abuse experiences. My sister, though, lives in New Zealand. She lives on the other side of the world, and I've only ever seen her once in the past. No, sorry, twice in the past, like 15 years, I think it is. She came over for one of my auntie's funerals, and I went to stay over there after she had my nephew. While I was over there, we were able to work some stuff out, but actually that's another challenging relationship with my family that kind of is part of the reparenting process. So reparenting can be to do with your immediate family, but it can, like your mum and dad, but it can also be to do with your grandparents. It can be to do with your siblings. It can be to do with your teachers. It can be to do with old friends. It's basically a process of integrating all these childhood wounds from an adult perspective and parenting yourself in the way you would have wanted to be parented through all of those different connections. So it can get a bit challenging, complex at times. But ultimately, where I am at the minute, and I'm sure it's an ongoing process, it always comes up again and again. I've just got this really good at this skill now of being able to trace back the wounds and reparent myself through what comes up. I have set boundaries with each family member individually. I don't consider my family now as a whole like I used to, which was basically a lot of my codependent coping strategies that were designed to keep us safe, but actually just kept me in that wounded child place, that victim wounded child place. And since I've been able to work through and separate each family member, each relationship as different, I no longer consider my family as this big thing. My family is much, much smaller to me now. My family essentially is like my mum, my dad, and have these other boundaries with each and every member of them because of that. I feel like I'm coming to the end of this video, and I don't know. I hope I've covered everything I wanted to cover. What I'm trying to get at is sometimes we don't realize that the wounds, things that we've gone through that have wounded us, are valid, because it seems like everybody else has gone through them as well, or we might be making a big deal out of them, or because we think, well, it was fine at the time. And it doesn't matter if it was fine at the time or fine in your culture. If it's not fine to you, or if it wasn't fine to the child within you, the child you were at the time, it's a wound and it needs to be worked through. Or we can ignore it and repress it, but it doesn't get sorted then. The process can have ups and downs, twists and turns, and can be different for every single relationship you're working through. The outcomes can be different. Some people might, you might go through a reparenting process and not want anything to do with your family. and that's fine. You might go through a reparenting process and never even talk to your family about it. It might be a personal thing you do. That's fine. Everyone's process is going to be different, and it's up to us as the new parent, as the new adult who is setting these boundaries, who is arranging this process to decide that and what's best for us and what's going to be best for our inner child and what our inner child wants to do to heal. So if you want to chat about any of this, if you're not seeing this in the inner child and reparent course, if you were seeing this on YouTube or something and you're really curious about this, and if you've had any sort of emotional response to some of the examples I've given, some of the things I've said, the likelihood is you need this process. It's going to help you. If you're interested in inner child healing and reparenting, I have done a course through Love School, www.loveschool.uk. That'll all be linked up. You can buy this course, work through it. Some of it's videos, some of it's PDF, some of it's audio experiences. I don't solve the problem. I don't do any healing or reparenting. All I do is share my experiences, share the techniques, share the understandings you need to understand so you can go through your own process. And that course, you can use for that reason in order to support you on an inner child and reparenting process. If you're interested, it'll all be linked up. Please go buy the course. It's a really great value course. If you need any help with that, I can support people through Love School more, not one-to-one, as in person, but I can answer questions and comments or through the messaging system there. Obviously, on a public platform, I can respond to anything if you want in the comments. If you have any specific questions or if you just want to share in the comments, that's absolutely fine. But I won't be able to give you specific advice on your issue without going a little bit deeper. And I can offer one-to-one sessions if you would like through Love School as well to dive deeper into your situation. But anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. Let me know if it's been helpful. Anything you want to share, you can put in the comments. And if you are in the Inner Child and Reparenting course, thank you very much for getting the course. Hope it's been helpful. If you have any questions or queries about it, just message us and we'll work you through this process. Take care. Bye.